Hi, I'm Bill Rice with my executive brief. Today I wanted to go over this advisory opinion from the CFPB, which I think is quite shocking. Certainly seems to be overreaching. Essentially, what this advisory opinion suggests is that certain online, or as they call it, digital mortgage comparison shopping platforms, and of course the payments that they receive for the leads that they're generating are in essence a violation of RESPA. So I've written an article where we kind of go into all the background on what RESPA is and those sorts of things. So I'm not going to go too deeply in it, but in its sort of simplest form, essentially what RESPA is attempting to make sure doesn't happen to the consumer is a payment that is made for a referral. So someone gives a referral, maybe a real, probably the most classic example is a real estate agent refers someone to a mortgage a loan officer or vice versa, and then there's a payment exchanged. And really kind of the crux of this, which I think is important to retain, is the reason that they didn't want this to happen is they did not want this referral activity to cause a steering of that consumer to a product that might be not sort of the best product for them, or might be incentivized to me as a service provider to give a higher cost product so that I receive that incentive, or perhaps that referral fee increase the fees to that consumer. So there's a lot of nuance in that, but fundamentally, I think the biggest thing to understand here is that there seems to be a continued sort of slippery slope of moving advertising platforms and lead generation companies into the category of a loan originator. And I'm going to go through some examples because I think it's really important to place this. And maybe this is the misunderstanding or mischaracterization that's gotten some of these regulators into sort of a problematic territory where they've actually sort of included a lot of standard best practices that really sort of invalidates a lot of very useful, consumer useful activity that's going on. And so by going down this slippery slope, and they've started it, came out of the financial crisis and the mortgage meltdown, where they started to lump marketing services companies, lead generators, and the like into the category of loan originator, first by requiring a lot of these type of activities, depending on what they're doing, to actually be licensed as loan originators. So that was kind of the first of that sort of categorization or moving them under there, which then causes a slippery slope. And this one is really kind of game changing because essentially it invalidates all of the standard practices, and I would argue some of the standard best practices in generating consumer demand for lenders. So these lenders, most lenders, are buying leads at least at some level, and these leads are generated using these types of activities, which again, with this advisory opinion, sort of instantly invalidates all of them. And I'm going to actually kind of show you that in the course of writing this article, which you can get again on my executive brief. There are essentially 5 activities that this particular advisory opinion now considers violating practices. So pay to play. So essentially showing or presenting lenders or products, but in most cases, in the scenarios you'll see in most cases they're actually lenders, because we're so far away from the actual loan origination process that it doesn't really, in a lot of ways, make any sense to talk specifically about products. Nor does the lead generator themselves have enough information to actually suggest a specific product or the features of that product, things like interest rates and those sorts of things. And again, I'll demonstrate to you why there's some flaws here. Payments for promotion of the lenders to rotate the top. So that's kind of that featured. You're going to see this again in a lot of these, featured and sponsored. Again, a fundamental premise of just routine advertising, right? This sense of pay to play or this featured spot is something that's been with us back in newspaper days and TV days, and the yellow pages. So the more you pay, maybe the the more elegant the feature is, you get to put images, you maybe get a big box, you get a bigger size, maybe more frequency. So all of those, again, are fundamental aspects of just traditional advertising. So you pay more, you get more prominence and more frequency into that audience, right? Preferencing platform participants as affiliates. Again, some of this is, at least to me, seems somewhat redundant, right? If you're paying, you're an affiliate, and therefore you're going to get some placement or preferential placement, additional services promoted. Again, a lot of these are very similar. And then, of course, live transfers and handoffs. So in a lot of these cases, in some aspects of digital lead generation, there's actually a call made to the consumer and then a handoff to a lender. So a lot of times that's super helpful to the lender because we're asking some validating or qualifying questions. And really, all of this from the lender's perspective is really to filter consumers in such a way as they get the consumers they are best positioned to help, or that they are structured in a way to facilitate. So you'll see lenders focusing on all aspects of the market. You'll see some that focus a lot on veterans, right? And you'll see others that focus a lot on the purchase market, or you'll see some that focus on real estate investors with DSCR loans and stuff like that. So that isn't atypical where a lender will choose to focus in one area or not, and use these advertising platforms in order to filter in those consumers they can best help. So let's take a look at this. And again, you can take, I would definitely encourage you, if you are a lead buyer or a lead generator, that you take a look at this more deeply. Of course, this is the full PDF. There's about 27 pages in here. They highlight and lay out very specifically, and again, I think overly broad. The other thing that bears noting in here is this is RESPA in and of itself, and some of the things that are included in here are very old, right? These were built in a time that's very different than today, right? So these are 20-plus-year-old regulations that they are using the broad generality that was built into the law to account for sort of evolutions of what would happen in the future. So that's in there, but in essence, they've taken that and they've used it to sort of be overly broad, because now we're actually applying it to a circumstance that's probably not within sort of the original intent of what we're trying to even prevent, right? We're taking what we think is problematic, or at least the regulators think is problematic, and we're trying to just sort of slap this on top of it. But in essence, when you do that, you sort of wipe everything out in one fell swoop. So let's just go from the consumer's perspective so we can get a visual understanding of what we're talking about here, right? So, and again, be more sort of more practical in applying this. So the first thing that's kind of interesting as a consumer, if I want to just compare mortgages and I put this search in Google, by this advisory opinion, Google itself is actually violating, potentially a violation of RESPA, right? Because these folks that are listed under, and again, as we look at these examples, look to see what these platforms have done to help educate the consumer and inform them that these are sort of pay to play. These people are sponsoring. They are paying to be in this preferential. So there's quite a bit of copy and differentiation in these sorts of results to inform the consumer that these are in fact sponsored or paid. These folks are paying to be here, right? But within the letter of this advisory opinion, these activities themselves would be violations, right? Because they are in fact paying to be in these positions. So again, helpful consumer activity, because these are the folks that think they can best help the consumer find or begin to compare places that they can get mortgages from, right? So that is a consumer-friendly service. But from the aspect of sort of the CFPB, what they're insinuating is that by doing this, that potentially the consumers would be steered into these based on how much they're paying. But you can see right in the Google results, that activity is a mechanism or is part of the advertising platform. Lending Tree is paying more for frequency, for this particular keyword, to be in this position. So there's a lot of aspects as to why they're here based on how much they're willing to pay, right? So okay, so let's go beyond that and just kind of look at the top results here and sort of the different mechanisms that are used to help a consumer find a service provider and or a loan. So the first thing you'll see, as you remember me kind of showing you some of those different things that CFPB thinks are problematic and consider RESPA violations, you're going to see it right off the bat, right? But there's useful stuff here, right? So for instance, so one of the things that they say is a neutral way of presenting this type of information is using things like APR. But even in the context of this is certainly useful to me as a consumer because it gives me a sense of what sort of the general interest rate environment is right now and potentially what an APR would be. But this has nothing to do with my particular circumstance, right? This is just an average that's out there. Is it useful? Certainly. Is it my situation? No, absolutely not. And I could make a case that, can you even get to something that accounts for my particular situation? Probably not at this stage, and I'm going to show you why that's the case. So again, these are things that would become precluded activities. But just much like the Google Ads example, these folks are paying because they think they're in the best position to help these type of consumers. And so as a result of getting paid, they get a preferential placement in here. But again, this particular activity would come into question under this latest advisory opinion. So let's then say, okay, in the case of the CFP, they would like for the consumer to be able to get some actual options and then be able to filter those to find sort of the best provider. So I'm going to start entering some information, right? I've given my zip code. Let's say that this is my situation, looking to purchase, looking at a home that's about $300,000, willing to put this kind of down payment. I think that my credit score is somewhere around here. And as a result of that, I have, again, featured some partners that have told me as an advertiser that these are the type of situations and circumstances that they can support and they think they can help. So again, useful activity to help the actual consumer find a lender. But having said that, are they paying to be in this position? Absolutely, right? So again, calls into question potential RESPA violation. So as we go down the page, we actually see something that's probably closer to sort of what the CFP envisioned, right? In these particular cases, they're taking this information and they're providing things that would allow me to filter and sort based on APR and maybe some fees and these sorts of things. But I would submit that, again, this is super useful, but we shouldn't go down this path because this particular listing is really, as a consumer, no better positioned than this one in the sense that these are based on some wild assumptions still, right? I don't have enough information to know whether or not these are going to be and I would submit once we get to a licensed loan officer, and this is the value of a licensed loan officer, right? In that circumstances, they're going to go much more deep into your particular situation in order to find the right scenario for you. They're going to be able to consider your actual credit report, your actual debt, your actual income, your actual ability to repay, which is a big thing that came out of the financial crisis, is they wanted to make sure that we're considering the individual's ability to repay that loan. And we're just simply not able to collect that kind of information on an advertising platform. It doesn't make sense. Consumers would not be comfortable with that. We run into a whole different level of sort of protection of privacy and information and those sorts of things. So you don't really need to go there. But at the same time, by not going there, we don't want to preclude this kind of activity or consider it, a RESPA violation because this is Again, very useful to me as a consumer, but under the letter of this advisory opinion, this again would be activity that would potentially be questioned as a RESPA violation. And then as we go down through here, you're going to find out this is standard practice, right? This is a best practice for generating leads for a couple different reasons. One, it's definitely useful to the consumer, but at the same time, it also is very helpful to the lender, right? Because it's helping this filtering process. It's getting them a better, a higher quality lead and consumer to talk to. It's also helping the consumer themselves to potentially filter themselves and see whether or not they have a viable scenario to get a loan, and that they can, potentially be able to, as you can see, upfront cost and payments that are significant, right? But again, disclosed. There's all kinds of variability in here. Is this what your final, like if you hit the next button here, is this what you're going to end up with? I would say, 99 times out of 10, no, it's not, because there are some other nuances to this that you just simply can't be captured in your scenario. And so it's going to move these around. Will it be significant? Probably not, but it will be different. But again, things that if you read the letter of this advisory opinion, again, activity that would potentially be called under question as a RESPA violation. And again, we're going to see, here's another scenario where slightly different scenario where you're just collecting the information and then you're going to make a referral to a lender, right? And so this is another sort of typical activity where you're going to ask them a series of questions, somewhat similar to what's up here, a little more detailed. And then as a result, you're going to give that information to a couple different lenders to give them the opportunity to compare those lenders. And so one of is kind of the famous and probably the founder or the initiator of this type of activity was LendingTree, and they used to say, I don't know if it's still part of their marketing, but when banks compete, you win, right? So you can see we show your options, you score the win, right? So the same thing, right? That's going on. Again, this is best practices. This is a great way to get the consumer to someone who can help them and is interested in helping them. So this, again, a valuable part. Is it loan origination? Absolutely not. It's so far away from a loan origination process that they should not be in the same categories. It's simply trying to help the consumer get to service providers that are interested in providing them a set of loan options. And as they go through, they're going to still have a variety of options based on their scenario. So it doesn't just kind of come down to one. But again, I can't show you enough examples of the fact that everything that we see on the first page of Google, when somebody goes to, and this is why this is potentially so sort of shocking, is it has invalidated all of the consumer's current options to find a lender, which I think is again, was sort of irresponsible not to sort of think through that or walk through that, because every one of these is some variation of a pay-to-play or a featured or sponsored or affiliate sort of advertising mechanism. None of these folks are loan originators. They're just simply helping to find those options. Here's the last one, which is interesting, which is CFPB itself. If you invalidate all of those, then you end up with things like this, which are sort of just how-tos on how to compare things, but it never actually gets you to a lender. It never actually allows you to see who are the available lenders that help me. If I just go, based on TV advertising to a particular lender with no sort of filtering or no sort of indication of who can actually help me based on my scenario, again, like I said at the very beginning of this video, not all lenders are constructed in such a way to help you, right? Some specialize in veterans, some specialize in real estate investors, and it's a helpful exercise that marketing and lead generation platforms do to start to filter that and get you to lenders that are very motivated to help you, because they are actually paying to buy you as a consumer that lead. So I think this is an activity that is very helpful to both the consumer, to the lenders. It's a healthy part of the market and a healthy part of the comparison, and it's very standard practice for advertising. So I think this advisory opinion should be reevaluated. So again, hopefully this is helpful. We go into a lot of deep strategic things like this on my executive brief, so I encourage you to join and sign up for that newsletter, and we'll see you on the next one.